Today's video is sponsored by one of my favorite services, Audible. And Audible is the premier destination for audiobooks, original audio productions, and even things like podcasts. Personally, I use Audible pretty much every day to listen to Star Wars books and basically whatever else. And if you don't believe me, you can see that under this account alone, I've got over 1 month of listening time, which admittedly is a lot less than some of you. Let me know down in the comments how much you have. You can get a free month of Audible, which not only includes one free audiobook, but also wellness programs, theatrical performances, and more by going to audible.com/Eckhart'sLadder or by texting Eckhart's Ladder to 500-500. If you're looking for a recommendation, well, my go-to Star Wars book suggestion is always the Legends Thrawn trilogy. There's a great 20th anniversary audiobook version on Audible. But for something a little different this time, I'm also going to recommend that you check out Star Wars Allegiance and its sequel Choices of One, also by Timothy Zahn, which tells the story of Luke, Mara Jade, and more during the events of the Star Wars original trilogy. Anyway, thanks for the sponsor. On with the content. God bless the AT-ST, one of the most underrated vehicles in Star Wars history, sometimes referred to as a chicken walker, which is, in my opinion, not very nice. That was even the code for the Rogue Squadron AT-ST level for the N64 if you cheated like I did as a kid. That code will always be ingrained in my memory. And you know what? I've sometimes maybe been a little critical about walkers in the Star Wars universe, but the AT-ST deserves a lot of credit because it is absolutely phenomenal if used in the correct way. And a lot of this discussion comes from my recent read-through of Star Wars Allegiance, which I mentioned during the Audible sponsor. That book sees an AT-ST in its sort of prime environment in urban center, and it just absolutely dominates anything that goes against it. So let's talk about that. Before we get into the specifics of what makes the AT-ST so good, especially when compared with other walkers, let's turn to the new essential guide to vehicles and vessels for a quick look at the craft and its specifications. The AT-ST during the Galactic Civil War was the latest in a series of two-legged walkers, which also saw the AT-PT and other vehicles. The main difference between the AT-ST and the older AT-PT was that the AT-ST had longer and thinner legs, making the walker much faster, but a little bit more unstable than its predecessor. The AT-ST's command module was positioned on top of its legs and could swivel to 240 degrees. The weaponry on the command module could be swapped out depending on the mission type, but frequently the AT-ST was armed with twin light blasters, a concussion grenade launcher, and a light blaster. The twin blaster cannons are on the sort of nose of the AT-ST, but the concussion grenade launcher and the light blaster cannon are turreted and can swivel 360 degrees. We see in Allegiance that they can fire against ground troops, enemies behind the walker, ships flying over, and basically anything else. The twin blaster cannons and the concussion grenade launcher offered a lot of firepower, enough to completely demolish buildings, allowing the AT-ST to tear through city blocks, while effectively supporting or operating independently in either an anti-personnel or even an anti-armor role. The AT-ST was very versatile. In addition, the AT-ST as a scout walker had a full sensor suite and could even jam local communications, which would have been very useful for countering rebel guerrilla techniques, especially in close environments. AT-STs were frequently used to protect larger walkers, to scout out difficult terrain, to provide a lot of cover in tight spaces, or for local defense and security forces. However, as I mentioned earlier, the AT-ST could be fit into even more roles through its modular weapon systems, and the walkers were frequently armed with mortars, exclusively anti-personnel or anti-armor weapons instead of a mix of both, missile launchers, construction equipment, or basically anything else. Alright, so a few more details before we move on. First of all, the AT-ST could reach speeds of 90 kilometers per hour, which is pretty damn fast for something that large on two legs. Second, as we find out in Star Wars Allegiance, the AT-ST could be run autonomously. Basically, the walker was capable of patrolling an area and firing on any being or thing without the proper authorization code. Finally, as we also learn in that novel, the legs of the AT-ST were basically impenetrable and could not be destroyed by small arms fire, and even the command module was difficult to pierce. The real weakness on the AT-ST was the gyro system at the back of the walker, but it was somewhat difficult to hit because of the AT-ST's speed, the way it moved, and of course the full range of sensors and guns, which allowed a competent AT-ST pilot to not only see but fire on any enemy in a 360-degree vicinity. So I know what you might be thinking. Mac has really been hyping up this vehicle so far, and I see some of it, but it just seems like another pretty deadly Imperial piece of technology. And in some situations, that is the case. At the Battle of Endor, for example, the AT-ST certainly did not shine. It really struggled with the terrain of Endor, despite its name, the all-terrain scout transport walker. But here's the thing, the AT-ST is one of the best examples of a walker that actually should be a walker. What I mean by that is that there are major drawbacks when it comes to choosing to create a walker rather than a wheeled tank or a treaded tank or a repulsor lift vehicle or whatever else, and the AT-ST not only compensates for those weaknesses, but generally turns them into strengths. For example, an AT-AT is not very mobile. It has a lot of difficulty hitting enemies directly behind it. The AT-ST compensates for that in several ways. First of all, the command module can swivel 270 degrees, and it has turreted lasers. Even the front blasters on the AT-ST swivel. This allows it to put fire, heavy fire, at any enemy directly in front of it, while also covering its rear. This is especially effective in like closed urban spaces where it's difficult to get as much firepower as you would have in a package as small as the AT-ST. And that also comes down to the legs on the walker. The AT-ST can more easily move laterally or backwards than a comparable vehicle, maybe not as easily as a repulsor lift tank, but it's not vulnerable to anti-repulsor lift technology. The legs itself are very sturdy, they're unlikely to fall to small blaster fire, for example, and the walker's legs are weapons themselves when facing infantry or even light vehicles like speeders. Because the AT-ST is very vertical rather than wide, it can operate really well in narrow streets, and its height gives it a natural advantage on the battlefield. If you're trying to hide in a building as a rebel troop, for example, you'd definitely rather fire on a tank close to the ground than a walker, which is quite tall with advanced sensor technology. So I've been talking a lot about Star Wars Allegiance and how that shows the power of the AT-ST. Well, let's talk about what actually happens in that book. Basically, an AT-ST is set loose in an urban environment, and the combined efforts of an Imperial Stormtrooper team, the Emperor's Hand Mara Jade, Chewbacca in a freighter, and Luke, Han, and Leia really struggle to take it down, and Mara is only able to get at it through some really fancy speeder bike tricks and a little bit of luck. But you know what? At the very end, they find out that the AT-ST wasn't really operating at its full capacity because it was on an automatic mode. There were a few moments where she felt like it wasn't operating at its full potential, it wasn't getting kills that it could have, and Mara only manages to defeat the walker because of its predictability, which is because it was computer controlled. So yeah, the AT-ST does not get the full respect it deserves. It can absolutely dominate in an urban environment. It's probably the best example of a functional walker with its maneuverability, its speed, its firing arc, its range of weapons, its modularity, and its ability to serve in multiple roles, from scout to support walker to whatever else. In conclusion, you do not want to see this thing charging at you, grenade launchers and blaster cannons firing. But guys, that's all I have for today's video. Hope you enjoyed this content. Once again, thank you to Audible for sponsoring today's video, and until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.